Hey everyone, welcome to the Closet Writer Chronicles. I'm your host Sangeeta, aka the Moody Marshmallow. So, I know this bonus episode was supposed to come out at the end of season 2, but this is actually closer to season 3, or more about season 3 at the end of this episode. So, as most of you all know, I had put up a poll on social media a couple of months ago on what this bonus episode should be about, and you guys said we should do a video panel discussion about the subject, reviewing stories, books and films, and that is exactly what we're doing. Now, the video version is already out on YouTube. This is the audio version, and this is actually a little more extended than the video one, so there are some fun facts and content which you won't find on YouTube, which you will find on all the audio versions. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our panelists. So joining us today, we have Aditya Mani Jha, who is currently a freelance writer, but has been books editor at the Hindu Business Line and commissioning editor at Penguin Random House India. You can find his articles on books and films in India Today, Mint Lounge, Open Magazine, and several other publications. Next up, we have Deepanjana Pal, who is a culture critic, writer, and podcaster. She has worked with Time Out Mumbai, Elle, Newslaundry, and Hindustan Times, to name a few. She is currently the managing editor at Film Companion. And last but most importantly, returning back for a second time, we have Suchin Mehrotra, who is also a critic at Film Companion. He is the host of Streaming with Suchin and the podcast, The Streaming Show. You find his articles on Firstpost, Hindustan Times, and other publications. I highly recommend that you listen to Chronicle 18 from season 1, which is an episode I did with him. And without any further delay, here's the episode. Enjoy the show. Hi everyone, welcome to the Closet Writer Chronicles. It's our first ever panel discussion, and we're talking about reviewing stories, books and films. And thank you to Aditya, Deepanjana and Suchin for being here. So the first thing I want to just ask to kick this off is, how do each of you define your own brand or style of reviewing stories? Deepanjana, would you like to go first?
No, I definitely do not want to go first. I have no brand. There is no brand here. There is just a very opinionated person. There is no brand. But I feel, as the veteran in this, only because of age, not because of experience, I'm going to defer to my younger comrades to do this before me.
I can give a very easy answer. Mine would probably be a struggle with coherence. I think that's my brand. It's a lifelong struggle.
Okay.
Wait, so you mean like in terms of like what are we trying to do sort of different?
Yeah. Okay. What is your genre of review? That's a more.
It's an attempt at horror. I can attempt to do it. I don't know. That's a tough one.
Like, if you had to describe it in one line, like is it very Wes Anderson style? I don't know.
Okay. Firstly, I think you have to do this for a very long amount of time. I speak for myself to even be able to aspire to anything close to that. So I couldn't. But with me, I guess if I have to put it in one line, I just try and keep it sort of as accessible as possible. Even though you just try and make it try and say things that are close to insight or resemble insight, but try and sort of package it in an accessible way. That's the closest I could say.
Okay, Aditya?
I think I got my start doing mostly print reviews and mostly books. And I sort of branched out to films a few years later. So I think the mandate that was given to me, or what my editor told me initially when I started reviewing books professionally, was that your audience is going to be young, but it's also going to be mostly university students and academics, etc. So you have to talk about big, heavy things in a way that sounds, young and pep.
Yeah.
So that's the voice that I was asked to put on. And I think because I did so much of that during my formative years, I think some remnants of that have stuck. And one thing that I'm often told about my reviews is that it that you sound much like vastly older than you are. And
Okay.
I don't know what to make of that. I think sometimes it's a really good thing, sometimes it's not so good. But yeah, since your question I think was about brand, but I sort of took it as a question about style.
Yeah.
I think that's yeah, I'd sort of, I think the overwhelming feeling you might get after reading some of my reviews of that. Yeah.
No, because the reason I asked this is I think today also, it just generally the way writing's evolving, right? Just even with authors or even like critics for that matter, it almost is like, it's like readers are going to a particular type of review or type of person who is writing, because you do kind of offer a certain style of voice, basically, so to speak. So it does kind of become like, oh, this is this person's brand persona, or however you want to call it, even though it's a creative field, so to speak, which is why I was curious, like, oh, do you guys kind of see yourselves like that? Do you see your writing like that when you're reviewing stories at all?
But I don't think that's a feature of the present. I think that's always been the case. I mean, for example, Pauline Kael was known for being a savage critic.
Yeah.
Roger Ebert was known for being a kind critic. So the nature of taking interpretation and turning it into a product that has to be sold involves sort of, reducing it to, bite-sized ideas like this. So I don't think that's necessarily a feature of today.
Okay.
If anything, I think, I mean, we'll get to this later perhaps, but if anything today, I think the problem that we have is that it's not so much, I feel, about style as much as you're required, or you're encouraged often just to fit with this notion of trending and piggybacking on virality. You're required to have extreme opinions rather than a considered opinion, which may be actually as extreme in its essence, but you're not allowed to approach it through nuance. You have to just start with, this is the worst book, film, artwork, song that I have ever seen, rather than this was, for these reasons, this has left me with a headache and wanting to point a gun to my head. Like.
Okay, yeah. So have you guys then ever been told to sort of present your reviews in a certain way? Or do you guys have complete freedom then to present it however you want?
I mean, I've never had to face that from any of the editors that I've worked with, but then I also worked with editors who made it very clear to me that I am expected, like, my responsibility as a critic is to give as balanced a view as possible. And by balanced, I don't mean not having one extreme opinion, but actually considering the work. Yeah. And there are very few works, creative works, that have absolutely no redeeming features. Tragically, that amount seems to be increasing when I do film criticism, but that's a separate problem. But even there, like, there will be some redeeming feature. And so I think that's a responsibility that a critic is entrusted with. And I have had editors asking me if I can justify the stand that I'm taking in a headline. And yes, I can. I will never put something on print that I can't back.
That's right. Aditya?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've faced this either, this direct sort of editorial intervention that, go easy on XYZ, or, I want slightly more about this aspect of work. But what I have faced on occasion is, requesting that a film or a book be covered in a particular context, usually to, fit the kind of aims that Deepanjana was talking about, to match some viral trend, or to, plug it to something that is being currently spoken about. Yeah. While that can be a drag, but I think what's worse is the converse when it happens in a way. Like, when you want to talk about something in a balanced way, or in a holistic sort of way, but due to the demands of the marketplace, you're asked to, sort of hitch the wagon to something which is something which is seen as more of an easy sell in the current moment.
Interesting. Suchin?
So I was just thinking about it. I mean, I agree with everything they're saying. I've never been in that position. Also because I think I really overthink. I really overthink when I'm writing a review about when you're being excessively cruel or the other extreme. I try and think about that a lot because I've been thinking about Deepanjana mentioned responsibility, and it really is a responsibility. And we've all read critics where it feels like they are sort of so married to what they want to say, how they want to say it. Sort of they're almost forgetting certain aspects of that. So I always think about that. So I try not to get carried away. But that's never happened to me, touch wood. But yes, I have had like I think experiences with smaller publications, not from companion. There are certain publications where you're reviewing X movie and you're told that they have some sort of marketing tie up with the film. And so, I mean, that I guess just comes with the territory. So you're like, okay, basically, if you have something negative, we can't run a negative review. And I've had sort of one strange experience on a smaller publication when I was reviewing something, and under the guise of editing, the editor used to basically, if you're talking about X actor in X movie, they had some points they wanted to make about X actor. So like, well, that's not, you're not editing me, you're inserting you. I mean, there's a so that sort of stuff happens. But no, in the context of your question, I've never had that of somebody saying, yo, you need to tone it down. But it's something I think about a lot because I'm just, even if we have 6 people reading us or watching us, I do think there is a responsibility of, you very much, like the punchline said, you're really trying to justify everything you're saying.
Yeah.
And not feeling like you can, I mean, obviously the whole point is to say what you feel, but do it in a responsible way, back it up, rather than just using it as just a medium to just, say whatever the hell you want without thinking. I mean, it's like one way of looking at it is don't say anything that you wouldn't say out loud.
Yeah.
Don't become a troll, something in that space. So yeah, it is a responsibility, and I think people should remember that. But no, I've never been in that situation.
Okay, that's interesting. So then how much would you guys say that you sort of depend on your editors in terms of making sure that you're conveying what you want to say as authentically as possible? Suchin, would you like to start with this?
So this is actually a bit of an odd one for me because I don't actually have an editor. When I was writing, I did. Firstly, everyone correct me if I'm wrong, but publications in India, there are very few true blue editors, right? It's most publications, they'll just do a spell check. That's sort of the norm, which is unfortunate because I think the editor is supposed to help you become better. In my current sort of role where I'm sort of reviewing on video, I don't have an editor. I've thought about it a lot, and I almost wish I did have one. But I guess it's double-edged sword because part of it is like you need a sense. Like, half the times we're writing these reviews under insane caffeinated circumstances, and you're turning it around so fast that you need another pair of eyes on that, whether it's a fact or just coherence or just like, are you saying what you think you're saying? At the same time, there is also the massive, in the interest of getting existential, there is the massive imposter syndrome of, if somebody reads this, will you be discovered? And somebody will say, finally tell you, seriously, like you're a professional, are you? Seriously, this is the output. But no, I don't have one, and I do think I should. But obviously I have people who read it and stuff, but I don't have so I'm probably the wrong person to ask about.
Aditya, do you have anything?
I think, when you're talking about editing and the role of editor, especially in print, perhaps it's a little different with podcasts or videos. But you have to realize that at least with print, the editor is reading the text closer than any human being should, in a way. If you're reading casually or for pleasure, there is no way in hell that you're reading the text as closely as a good editor does, with a view towards improving the overall quality and coherence and all that. Okay, so I think that's the crucial distinction between reading and close reading.
Yeah.
That difference is everything, and that difference is what good editors bring to the board, right? I think across 800 word stories or 900 word stories, and there is sometimes a lot that you can do within that word length in editing, but very often there isn't. But when you're talking about 2,000 words, 3,000 words, 4,000 word stories, a good editor makes a world of difference because there is just so many more ways in which you can improve a text of that length. There are so many points of views. There are so many perspectives that you can enhance your text with. And I think, as Suchin said, the number of people who do that still is reducing by the day. I guess, just to sort of diagnose why that is. It's just not incentivized. I think the quality of a text and what it means in terms of market value has been completely delinked.
Okay.
So there is just no incentive to have more than a certain number of good editors on board.
Deepanjana?
So I'm not somebody who's wildly confident about much of my abilities, but one thing that I am happy to take for myself is that I can edit a piece, and I think I'm a better editor than I am a writer. I mean, yeah, definitely a better editor than I am a writer. And the point is that I think actually the person who put it really well is somebody who recently passed away, the American editor Robert Gottlieb, who's legendary in American publishing because there is nary an author he has not edited or brought out at a very critical time. And he described editing as a service job. You serve the text, and the text, no matter what kind of reviewing you're doing, whether it's audio or video or written, there is a text, and the text is sacred, and the text is trying to say something. Like ultimately, a critical piece, like a review, is an interpretation of a work. So it's very individual to the writer who has come up with it. So it falls upon an editor to figure out how that individual view can be crystallized best. If you have a situation where you need to do nothing except take the extra comma out, amazing. But it's incredible how much damage an extra comma can actually do to a text. You don't know that until you let it go past a good editor who knows how to use punctuation, who understands the different pauses between a semicolon and a colon and a dash and things like that. So whatever it is that is required, if it requires extensive rewriting, then that is what an editor should do. Quite honestly, I am radical enough to say that if the writer has not been able to find their words, but they have an idea there that the editor is able to see. Of course, in an ideal world, it would be a collaborative process where there's a back and forth and the writer comes to it, but we don't live in ideal worlds, especially in media right now. You have to turn it around within seconds, practically. So at that point of time, I will absolutely rewrite it, but I will send it back and say that, is this what you meant? Are these the words that you wanted to use? Do you know why you're using this word? Because this is one of my pet peeves as an editor, which I find more and more among sort of, younger generation authors. They use words that sound really right to them, but aren't actually right. Like I had this fabulous moment where a writer told me, I didn't realize there was a difference between hips and waists. And I was like, they're literally two different body parts.
Yeah.
And this is not somebody who's stupid, by the way. They're not. They're an extremely astute mind. But we've lost certain things. There's a lot that the internet has done for us, but some things that we've lost are like going back to check a dictionary when you come across a word that you don't know. But, all of us pick up language because we read or listen, and we figure out meanings depending upon the context in which we're hearing a word.
Yeah.
There's so much overconsumption right now that no matter how bright you are, the temptation to just go with, oh, this sounds great, and I'm going to go with it without actually figuring out whether this is really the right word and it's communicating what you want to communicate. That happens a lot. So, I mean, my great sorrow for myself is that I've had very few people who have edited me in a way that has helped me. But the great part is that the ones who have been amazing. Like I have learned so much. My first proper job as a cultural critic was with Time Out Mumbai, back in the day when it was still there, and Naresh Fernandez was the editor. And he is an amazing editor, which we know now from pretty much everything that he has done. But he's he sort of shaped up this entire team of us, and all of us learned so much with every edit that he did. Like we would have two folders, the unedited folder and the edited folder, and it was a masterclass in journalism with just looking at those two folders. As a from sort of the fiction writing part of things, I've written a bunch of children, three bunch.
Yeah.
Like how I'm just, overstating the case for myself. 3 books, 3 kids books that I've written for Pratham Books, and Bijal Vajrajani, who's a good friend of mine, has edited them. She's such a fantastic editor. She will not ever do me the favor of rewriting, even though she could totally rewrite it better, but she will make me see what what I need to do to fix that and to make it better. So when you do have a good editor and you see your ideas coming together, it is just the most fulfilling experience. And yeah, like Aditya said, it is unfortunately becoming rarer and rarer to find these people. But if you do find a good editor, I think that that helps the writing for sure. But from the perspective of being an editor, even though, I mean, it seems like it's such a thankless job, because obviously you're not getting so-called credit for it because your name isn't there, whatever. But it is the most satisfying thing, I think. Like when you get a text and you go through it, and then you and the writer arrive at a point where you are both happy with it, and it's doing what it's meant to do.
Yeah.
And it's reading beautifully. What more can you ask for? I mean,
yeah, no, true that. No, because sorry?
I want that. That sounds so nice.
Well,
I'll just add one thing.
Yeah.
Just because Deepanjana, just mentioned that it's about being a thankless job, and I think that's slowly changing. I think last year, for example, I wrote a long form story of about 4,000 words or so, and for Supriya Nair's 52. And as I discovered through the process of editing and working with the editors at 52, they have at the end of every story, there's a film credit style page where the editors and the illustrators and the copy editors and the fact checkers, they all receive credits prominently. So I think I was really happy to see that.
That's amazing.
Also, I mean, to be fair, as I think any writer who has worked with me will confirm, it is not always the most satisfying experience to go through the process. That might be painful, a little bit brutal, and might damage you just a little bit emotionally, but we will all come out healthier, more whole, and with a better article at the end of it. This I promise.
Yeah, I think it's about surviving every manuscript workshop also, essentially, it's amazing. You think you've written like gold, and then you come out and it's like, oh, this was terrible, actually. But yeah. Oh my God, no, but...
I mean, I was just going to say, I guess that's the aim, right? How do you write something because ideally it means something to you, and it's a part of you there, and you're just, in a perfect world, you're detached enough that if someone's giving you a perspective and editing it, it's going to become the best version of itself, which is all you want. But then obviously when there are edits, the existential crisis part of you will sort of take that personally on your ability, but that's not necessarily the case, right? So I guess that's the tough part. How do you care about what you've written, but not just be married to it, but attach your entire self-worth to that one?
Yeah, because in a lot of ways, actually, the relationship between a writer and editor is almost like a marriage, because the piece is like your baby in a way, if that's one way of looking at it. But yeah, this is how I've heard some people talk about it, and I kind of agree, because I've just seen it happen in my short span in publishing, the way things have worked. But yeah, but I'm glad we had this conversation, because I don't think people talk about this as much and really talk about the editorial part of it, especially with the piece. And because even with reviews, like, you guys do have to give it to editors. I mean, however, I don't know, invested or long drawn that process is with editorial, because since you have to obviously churn out pieces at a much faster rate. But yeah, having said that, do you guys think reviewing stories is like an art form in itself? Because books are art, movies are art, our reviews are art.
Who wants to go first?
I think that I'll go first, and I'll say I think it has the potential to be art for sure.
Okay.
And I think the other forms that you have mentioned are more socially accepted as art. That makes sense. I think with reviews, I don't think there's a consensus about it being art. I think people who do it and people who are familiar with the history of the medium and so on, they're they will understand what Deepanjana means. For example, when she says that Pauline Kael is a certain kind of critic or Roger Ebert is a certain kind of critic, they will know instantly what they mean. But I don't think there is as widespread a consensus about it being art as filmmakers or artists, etc. And honestly, I'm not sure how to change that.
Okay, Deepanjana?
I don't think it's an art.
Oh, okay. Why do you say that?
I mean, as a reviewer, I think reviewing is interpretive, and interpretive is not creative.
Okay.
It can be artistic. It can be done artistically, but anything can be done artistically. Sweeping the floor can be done artistically. So I don't think this is not me saying that reviews can't be beautiful, that they can't be insightful, that they can't be beautifully done, that they can't be aesthetically powerful. They can be all of that. I just don't think they're artistic. I think art is creative, and reviews are interpretive. And just for that reason, for me, a review is not artistic. A review can be artistic, but it's not art. Art is spontaneous. It exists on its own. It is, whether it finds a consumer or not, it exists and it is valid. Yes, a viewer completes a work of art, I think, but it is not such a state of incompleteness without a viewer that it will sort of question its own existence, for the want of a better phrase. But a review is a service, again. It's interpretive. Without a work of art, there is nothing to review. It doesn't exist on its own. One of the problems that we have with a lot of the older critical writing, for some stuff like films, not so much for books, but because books, at least that source text is usually available should you want to put the effort into finding it. But, if you're reading a review of a film that came out in the early 1950s, I mean, it doesn't even have to be an obscure film. So many old films are just not easily available. And when you're reading the review, you can't go back to that source material. It is somewhat left incomplete because of that. So yeah, for me, reviews are not art. They can be artistically done, but I don't think it's an art.
Makes sense. Sachin?
No, before I give my half a sense, I want Deepanjana to add a point, because we discussed this once before, and you put it in a really interesting way. You said that when you're writing books, your one of your children's books, you said a different part of your brain works, and I thought that was a really interesting sort of way to look at it.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, whether it's so I've written 3 children's books. I've written 1 biography and 1 novel. Yeah. Because why limit myself to one genre or one audience? Right? Whatever the hell you feel like it. So having written, basically my point is that I've written stuff that is critical, from the perspective of critique rather, and stuff that I've written completely from the perspective of being creative. And as an original work. And it's like we had this very elaborate conversation once some time ago. It is a different part of my brain. I cannot, in fact, I find it hard to sit down to write creative stuff if I have spent too long with my editor hat on, because it really is just a completely different perspective on story, on writing, on work. The work in progress just moves differently when you are writing from the perspective of a writer, as opposed to the perspective of a critic. For me.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Suchin, you were saying?
Yeah, no, I mean, these are very sort of complex, abstract things to discuss. And again, I don't know if I have the depth to do justice to them, but I can just tell you as a reader, it's a couple of things. I don't know if it makes sense to me. Film criticism in its purest is an art form, but the question is a review, is that art? I mean, from a reader's perspective, I feel like on some level it is. If I'm speaking for myself, if you define art as sort of something that can truly move you, and after experiencing that thing, sometimes it feels like the ground has shifted somehow. My life is now 1% better than it was a few minutes ago. And yes, I've obviously had that experience with movies and things like that, and other forms of art. And I have had that experience with reviews. It's rare, these are, it's definitely not across the board. But yeah, I have had reviews where it's sort of, again, it is entirely dependent on movies, right? It's not independent. It's tethered to another thing. It's not necessarily standalone. Though I think reviews can be, but yeah, I have sort of experienced things and then read about them, and then the reading of the thing sort of hits me in a way that the thing didn't. Again, it's entirely dependent. And so, yeah, and you do feel moments of magic. Sometimes, I don't know if there's any logic to this, but sometimes I think that, I was trying to figure out why that is. And, movies are about life to some degree. And I think sometimes the reviews I read that feel like I've just experienced art are the ones that talk about life. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily just the sort of surface level discussion of the movie, but really getting to the heart of it, and what the movie's trying to do. And so it feels like, you're reading something that's talking about life, more than a movie review, as people see it. But that's just me as a reader. So I don't know if it's an art form, but it does. I do feel that magic sometimes.
It's not just you, it's also Susan Sontag. This is pretty much exactly what she writes in Against Interpretation, where I can't remember when Against Interpretation was written. Absolutely no clue, but it was like a very, very long time ago. And she uses the word content for creative works in Against Interpretation, which I remember thinking that, wow, we've just sort of, gone back in time to go forward in time. So anyway, I think she calls criticism or interpreting the way it's being done in critical writing as subtle or not so subtle nihilism. So clearly she was not happy with what was being done. But she says that, of course, there's space for good criticism and interpretation is required. And for that, what you need is an understanding of the form and a writing that will be sensitive to form and descriptive rather than prescriptive vocabulary. And that's something, Against Interpretation, I really think Susan Sontag, whatever you're interested in, you should just pick up a Susan Sontag book because she will blow your mind 9 times out of 10. But Against Interpretation is something that I feel like if you are actually interested in understanding your role as a critic, then it's one of those books that's a good one to take, because you have to sit with it and think, what am I doing with my writing, or what am I doing with my work? Is it falling into what she's accusing criticism of? Am I doing that? And if I am doing that, then what is my justification for doing it? How do I counter what she's criticizing effectively me for? So I really think it's a very interesting text to go through if you are strongly interested in criticism.
Yeah, I honestly just might.
But the point is, Suchin, you and Susan Sontag, twinning.
I could have told you that.
Oh my God. No, but it's interesting you spoke about this, because one of the things I wanted to ask, because Deepanjana and Aditya, both of you have backgrounds in publishing, essentially, be it with writing books or being, commissioning editor and whatnot. So then do you think being aware of the process of, say, in terms of books, at least with how print works, does that affect the way you review books?
Okay, so I had been reviewing books since much before I actually did a job in publishing. And so I was in publishing between 2017 and 2019, the summer of 2019, I would say. So just over 2 years. But even before that, I had been, fairly regular reviewing books for different publications. I think my stint in publishing did sort of make me a little bit more aware of the production aspects of book. There are certain pragmatic problems which explain a lot of common issues with Indian books. Like, for example, why we don't see too many color graphic novels in India. It's related to a number of mundane, boring reasons, like paper costs, import competition from China. So these are not things that really translate well to a readership that is interested in comics, etc. But these are things that you learn while on the job. But no, in terms of style or in terms of the way I approach reviewing a book, I don't think it has substantially changed because of the fact that I ended up being a commissioning editor at Penguin and ended up acquiring and editing books of my own. What I will say is that it has made me a little bit more aware of the value of not, say, judging, an author who is only one or two books old by the same set of parameters as you would, write about an author who's in their 15th or 16th, 17th book, right? So I think it has made me a little more sensitive to that kind of thing. That's the primary takeaway, I would say.
Can I just ask, does reviewing books have any sort of impact in then how you guys review movies? Deepanjana, I know you said it's been a while, but does that change anything in your head?
So yeah, I haven't formally, when I say formally reviewed a book, I mean I haven't sort of, written it for a print publication. I have a newsletter which I sporadically send out once a month with whatever not anymore whatever I've read, but things that stayed with me.
I'm a
So end up.
Yeah, I read your review of Yellowface.
I just said I'm a subscriber, just for the record.
Hey, awesome.
I have a t-shirt. Yeah, this is the complete thing now.
No, but also I like your review of Yellowface because I've read the book and yeah, it made sense. But yeah, moving
awesome.
on.
Thank you. So yeah, the newsletter is really where I do whatever book reviewing one could call it. So I would call it informal because it's not obviously a formal publication, which is not to say that I pay any less attention to what I'm writing there, because see, the thing is, I'm one of these old people who came to writing and criticism online at a time when the internet was young and very different from what it is now. And for me, especially 20 odd years ago, when I first realized how much you could find on the internet for free, it was incredible that people were considered, I didn't realize the value of it then. It was magical because, you didn't have access to a lot of things, unless it was in a university library or something like that. And then here were people who were breaking down their chains of thought and sharing their sources and sharing their arguments with generosity. And it just blew my mind. It has been such an important part of helping me develop my points of view. So whenever I'm putting up anything online, I would like it to be, I keep in mind that there might be somebody who will chance upon it, and I don't want them to get a half-baked thought from my head. I will give, it may not be as well polished as it could be, because obviously there is no editor and it's just me, verbal vomiting onto my Substack, but it will be worked out. I will not write it until that thought has properly figured itself out in my head. So the newsletter is where I do most of my book reviewing. Like Aditya said, I think for me, the only thing that being aware of publishing has brought is how I see authors. I am much more unforgiving of established authors because of what I know of the publishing business, because they get so much more by way of privileges, services, leeway, everything, so for example, marketing. Exactly, marketing. So if, for instance, there's a well-established author who has a truly awful cover, I will write them for it because that's on you, friend. You had a call. You're not a first timer. No one's slapping a cover on you. You can do better. If it is not well edited, if there are typos, God forbid, which is sadly prevalent, I will absolutely point that out and take you to task. But I will not do the same thing for a new author, because I know that you don't have that much say. And more than, for example, for Hushaby Baby, I have the cover is not great by my personal estimation. I didn't think it was great when they showed it to me the first time. Did I not have the freedom to turn around and say, please change it? Probably. I don't know. I think Chicky would have paid attention to me if I'd said it. But the thing is that I was like, you guys know best. I don't know what works. I wanted, if you tell me that a lurid, glowing red fetus will stand out in a shelf, you have my blessings. And so there's a lurid glowing baby on the cover of the book. I don't know if that works so well aesthetically. But the thing is, you just feel too unsure to be able to put your foot down. But 2 books later, 3 successful books later, you can definitely put your foot down.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that is something that affects how I see books as a critic, from the perspective of knowing a little bit about what goes on in the publishing world. But by the same token, if I hear, I mean, obviously we all gossip, right? Like as much as we all can. For me, I think the other part is just to not pay attention to that gossip when I'm thinking of the book. It's like, I'm not going to name names, but if there's somebody that I do not like, and their book is getting a lot of praise, I'm not going to write about that book, because the fact that I don't like them is definitely going to show up in my writing. And that's not fair. That's not fair at all. That's got nothing to do with how they write. But unfortunately, when you're working as a critic, you have to be very, very clear how much of yourself you're bringing to the work. And if I feel like, I mean, most of us will say that, we can put our personal biases aside. Of course we try, but can you really? I don't think so. Like, if someone has been an absolute bastard to me in real life, how forgiving will I be of their work?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I would be. I'm honest enough to accept that.
Yeah.
And by the same token, if someone has been extremely lovely to me in real life and they write a truly god-awful book, am I not going to be kinder to it?
Interesting, yeah.
It's in a very different way. It's like, most of us develop certain kind of biases or fondnesses for work, artists, like an author or a filmmaker. And then that when that filmmaker makes something, or when that author writes something, you will consider it with a little more care and a little more leeway than you would somebody else. It's like, I always say that in India, for example, Anurag Kashyap has a loyal fandom, and for good reason. Like, there's a lot that he brought to Indian filmmaking language that was necessary, and it's been great. But that doesn't mean every film of his is wonderful. However, when an Anurag Kashyap fanboy reviews, and there are many who do, there's so much allowance that is given to him. That, even a truly awful film of his will seem like it's okay in the review, when it is in fact verging on unwatchable.
That's fair.
But but that is how bias works. You give a little more indulgence in that sense, because the work has responded to you so many times that today you will give them, like Wes Anderson, another example. People will fall over themselves when they love his work, and they will find ways of justifying what is to somebody else a glaring problem in the way he's made the film. That bias makes you more indulgent. The same thing being done by somebody else who has not earned your love as a critic or a fan in the same way, they will not get that much leeway from you. But that's something that I feel like, as critics, it's something that we really need to know ourselves well before we sit down to write, because that is also part of our responsibility.
No, that's a really good point. And I don't know, Aditya, Suchin, like, how has it been for you in terms of keeping aside, I don't know, are you aware of, say, biases you may have in terms of stories, and actually keep being objective then to what you're writing about a certain story?
I mean, when you talk about biases, it's like 15 different things you can discuss. The 2 things I'll say is, the thing I struggle with is, sometimes I think the purest way to watch something is you wish you could watch it before the noise starts. There's 2 kinds of noise, right? There's the marketing hype. Everyone is talking about every aspect of whether it's Kashyap's next film or Adipurush, whatever it is. And it's just like, you just wish you could watch it independent of the noise. And the other kind of noise is it's come out for whatever reason, you haven't seen it first day, first show, press screening, etc. And now you're combating the noise of like somebody somewhere, I would judge them, but should have the freedom to like Adi Purush, but the noise is deafening it. So it's I mean, we would obviously, cut them out of our lives, but the point is, you should be able to have an opinion that fights that. So that's one thing. I don't know if that's biased, but there's just so much, or sometimes it's just pure judgment. Like I will, there is a show coming out on Z5 that doesn't look particularly good, based on an extensively impressive track record of just stuff. Naturally, it's not exactly going to excite me, but technically every show should be given its due. So you really wish, something Anu always says is, you got to sort of, part of being a critic is you have to truly believe anything could be the next Sholay. And we all have so many, examples of things that have truly surprised us. And those are the most wonderful things. Basically that idea of not being jaded and, even if something looks sucky, being open to it. And I think, us being good at our jobs means that you give credit where it's due, and you will always sort of, discuss the merits of that. But yeah, that's always tough. Or even just the baggage of, that's the other thing I was thinking about a lot recently, whether it's a Nolan film or a Kashyap film. There's so many people who review filmographies instead of films, which is fair. That's what we're supposed to do. You put them in context, but technically a filmmaker should be able to do something completely different. And I guess trying to find that balance, like I'm sure this is something that Anurag Kashyap would complain about a lot. He's still seen as Gangs of Wasseypur. And it's like, tomorrow, if he wanted to, I mean, he did make a rom-com, less said about that, the better. But the point is, you should be able to do something different. And you're trying to have a discussion of that thing and give that thing the discussion it deserves, and completely free if you choose to put it in context of the wider filmography. Wes Anderson, Nolan, that's, all everyone's going to do, and that's completely fair. But how are you doing that? So I guess that's the other part of it. But yeah, bias is always very, very tricky, and really going in with it, even if something as silly as In My World, season 2, you're watching season 2, season 1 was a mess. So how do you really keep an open mind and really give something its due? Because we all love to be surprised. That's all we want. We just want to leave with a smile on our face rather than, struggle with 3 hours of our lives we're never getting back.
Aditya?
I think once you seriously engage with any kind of criticism over a number of years, you will eventually fall into some kind of an ethical cul-de-sac where you have to decide whether, as the partner said, whether you want to, you'll make your peace with not being as harsh on something that, that deserves probably a greater degree of harshness. So yeah, in a way, deciding what not to write about is just as important as deciding what to write. But for example, me personally, I took a call a couple of years ago, look, I just physically can't write a review like a Kangana Ranaut film, okay? Because I just thought that it is physically impossible for me to separate the memories of her being herself online and her persona as an artist. It's wonderful and advisable to separate art versus artist, but sometimes it's not physically possible. I think it's honest if you recognize those blind spots within yourself, and it's probably better if you err on the side of silence on those 1-2 things, rather than, you're deciding to write about it and then, your whole heart will be there in that piece, and it'll, most hearts are really ugly. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, but it's good to know. I mean, you guys have your own take on it, and you're not fairly self-aware, I would say, honestly speaking.
I don't think you can be a critic without being self-aware. I mean, I think that's part and parcel of this. Also being I think a massive ball of insecurities filled with existential dread. That's also, I think, part of the job description. But you do need to be self-aware, because, like I said, you bring yourself into the writing in a way that that is inevitable. But also, Suchin, you were saying about how you would love to be surprised by a director. That's so true, because it just doesn't happen enough times. But one person whom I love to bits for surprising us all the time almost is George Miller, because this is a man whose filmography includes Babe, Pig in the City,
Mad Max,
Happy Feet, Mad Max, Witches of Eastwick. I mean, and then that 4,000 Years of Longing that he did most recently. Like, best of luck figuring out what he's going to do.
Oh, he also produced Bodyline, the series about the Bradman ashes.
There you go. Yeah.
So basically,
those are always the most interesting ones, where there is no through line, and and then sort of almost you're free to discuss each thing separately. But I would love to read that piece of sort of an informed mind being able to find those sort of common themes. I mean, that would be a great piece. So, but yeah, I mean, those are always very interesting filmmakers who really try and reinvent themselves.
No, because I mean, no, I think, I don't know if I completely agree with Deepanjana saying a critic should be self-aware. I mean, maybe if you're a critic who needs to be taken seriously, yes, but because almost everyone is like a reviewer. If you go on YouTube or Instagram at this point, like there are thousands of people giving their opinions, and some of them don't even really can be fairly baseless, because there's really no other way of saying it, because they're just saying it because they like a certain author. Like you said, it's like a certain fanboy or fangirl sort of club that's formed, and like, hey, I like this book for XYZ reasons, or I like this film for XYZ reasons, or whatever. And coming to the whole YouTube, Instagram thing, Suchin, you do video reviews. So, and I know you've kind of mentioned this, I think on the podcast you did with FC Popcorn with the critics, where you're really annoyed when people come up to you and say, oh, for a video review, you just switch on the camera and you're just saying whatever and it's done spontaneously. So what are things that people don't consider when it comes to a video review, and how different is it when it comes to a written review in terms of just prep and, getting the content out there?
So I'll just say two things on that. Firstly, just to give the context of that whole my complaint, it was not in reference to me. I will never ever defend myself for anything I've ever written. But this was something I remember.
But we all watch Suchin mostly for his pretty face. It's true.
Okay, well, I now want to turn my video off. No, but, yeah, it was basically it was somebody who sort of I met from the industry like a couple of years ago, and they were talking about Anu, I think. And I mean, obviously, it applies to all of us who do video, that like you can think we are terrible. You can, you can think that, we have no idea what we're talking about. But that idea, which a lot of these sort of amateur YouTubers who, consider themselves, I don't know what they consider themselves as, but if I see the word honest review one more time, I'm going to stop myself. But, the idea that you just press record and you just vomit out your thoughts. And yes, we might be severely caffeinated and sleep deprived, and it's a mad dash as it is for any, a film critic. But the idea is every word is considered. It is a written piece that is just being delivered to you in a different way. So it's not even give it the respect of there's a piece of writing, screw that, but just give it, the effort has gone in. Somebody sort of speaking out what they have written. It is that. It is really is sort of the effort has gone in there. The only other thing I'd say about how video reviews has changed how I write, something Deepanjana mentioned earlier, which I think every young writer sort of struggles with initially, the idea of what I should sound like versus, what I do sound like. I want to come across a certain way. I want to use the big words, be intellectual. I want to sound like Joey from that episode of Friends, that whole thing. And I mean, it's one of the most sort of low-hanging fruit, straightforward tips for editing your piece or when you're reading is anyone will tell you is just read it out loud, because that sort of enforces it to just so you can hear yourself. Is it coherent? Are you saying what you want? Does that sentence sound like you want it to? And I think that's one thing that I think writing for video has, I think, made me a better writer generally, in that specific context of just saying what you feel in a human way rather than processing it through sort of a weird, like it's sort of more direct and honest rather than sort of getting lost in trying to sound a certain way. Because again, when you have to say it on camera, at least for me, you're trying your best to sound like a human being and not like a robot, and so that's one thing that writing video has definitely given me, just in terms of just say what you feel without trying to overthink coming across a certain way. So yeah.
I have a question for all three of you. What for you is the difference between a reviewer and a critic?
Yeah, so actually I was going to add, because I was going to add something along those lines, because when Deepanjana earlier mentioned that reviews aren't something that she sees as an art form, and I think the parts of a critic's job that are adjacent to art, let's say, are also the parts where they're where that have to do with self-awareness, as Deepanjana said, that you have to be self-aware in order to be a critic. I think as Sangeeta pointed out, almost there's a great democratization of this line of work now. Almost everybody can turn a camera on themselves and be a reviewer. But I think to be a critic is not just a difference in degree, it's a difference in a point of view. I think to be a critic, you have to have a more realized point of view, not just about the thing you're talking about, but a sort of holistic point of view about the world and how you see it and how you see the role of art in that world.
Yeah. No, I actually, because even when you mentioned this question, wasn't really differentiating between reviewer and critic. But yeah, I think just to kind of take from what Aditya said, yeah, because I think anyone and everyone can review a story today. But I guess to be a critic or to be taken seriously, I think you need to have some sort of understanding, first of all, of the story, and there needs to be some kind of backing to what you're saying. It needs to be an informed opinion, as you say. Okay, for example, on YouTube recently, I came across I'm not going to take the names. I came across 2 book reviews on Stillborn by Guadalupe Nettel, which was shortlisted for the Booker. Beautiful book, but there was one review, and both reviews were done by white men. One review was just extremely insensitive and terrible, and I don't know what to say, because he was saying things like, oh, I don't really relate to this because it's about women. It's not something that interests me. So I don't think it's a book for everyone. And there was the other review, which was so sensitive about
Ranjan, write this review. Sorry.
No, and actually what Sangeeta says is particularly important in this context because this book is about 2 women who are confronting the question of
motherhood,
a child or not, and they have different opinions on that.
Yeah, and the other review is also by a white guy, but it's done so sensitively and so well, and he's really gone into what the writer's trying to do with the text, and how like it's not just for women, but like actually a larger demographic should read it to kind of understand, because it's very sensitive and it sort of gives a realistic picture of a situation like that. So it really comes down to, okay, what is your opinion and why is your opinion that, and is it an informed opinion? I think so. Yeah, I guess anyone can review, but I don't know if everyone can be a critic or be taken seriously in that sense.
I think for me it's 2 things. Firstly, specifically to this, everyone's a YouTuber. If you take a reader and you present them with 2 reviews, and they have no idea who anyone is, and you read them both, it's like asking someone the difference between low-hanging fruit popcorn entertainment and cinema. It's like it when you see it, right? So it's the same thing. And I think over time, the more everything becomes more democratized, the more value criticism has. I think over time, a Rahul review, a Vishal review, a Gail, Pratyush, etc. It really is. It has more value because it stands out from the crowd. Because that's all you want for whatever 6 of us who like to do this. You watch the movie, you want to understand it in context. You want to read great writing, and it really just stands out amongst the crowd a lot more. And Deepanjana, to your question about review versus criticism, the thing that gets stuck in my head is what Paddy Bhattacharya has always said. He said that he considers reviews like an Amazon reviews, like a product guide. Should I watch it? Should I not? Stars, yes, no. Whereas criticism is obviously engaging in a deeper discussion. So I do think there is a difference, especially in India. I mean, you have to make that distinction because we all, even if it's people who call themselves critics, like there are 6, 7, 8 genuine, legit, sincere ones, and everyone else is noise. So yeah, I think there is a distinction made. Like a lot of those YouTubers, even the ones who regularly, they're pushing you to their ultimate thing. Should I watch it? Should I not? Some of them break it down by pros and cons, which is fine. That's their world. But yeah, I think there definitely is a distinction.
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Deepanjana.
You're very welcome.
I think just the last sort of thing that I would add to this was in the context of a book, for example, I think this distinction is particularly easy to spot because, for example, there's a well-known novel called The Sellout by Paul Beatty, an American novelist, and towards the beginning of the book, there's a poem which is written like a song, and it's meant to satirize. And it's meant to depict how a group of black men cheat their white plantation owners, and it's structured in a way that after reading a few lines, the reader can make out that it's written to model or mimic or parody a poem by Tennyson, The Charge of the Light Brigade. Okay, so a reviewer can tell you that Beatty's poem is funny, that it's punching up, etc. But a critic can tell you that it's okay, so it's modeled after Tennyson. But not just the fact of that knowledge, but it can also point out thematic links and why it makes sense for a novel like The Sellout to channel Tennyson in that particular way.
So then, what is the process like in terms of reviewing a book versus a film? And for Suchin, for you, say a film versus a web show. Who'd like to go first? Deepanjana?
So, okay. If we're doing it like a flowchart, it's basically reading it, and in the process of reading it, either hating myself as a writer or hating the writer for being that good. That sense of just, why are you that wonderful, or why can't you do this better? I could have done this. Oh wait, but I have not done this. That means it's not that easy. Like, all of these absurd mental monologues will be part of the whole process of reading something. But you finish it, then you sort of think about it. And then you write it, which is a pretty straightforward through line, as it were. But it's worth keeping in mind, I think, and this is something that Supriya Nair had pointed out to me some time ago, because Supriya and I had a podcast where we basically talked about books and reading. And our process for it was basically to catch up over brunch and be like, okay, this is the book, or these are the ideas that we're talking about, and then walk into a studio and record. And it wasn't a structured conversation in that sense. It was very spontaneous. And we would, by the time it hit the 35-minute mark, we'd ask someone to wave at us and we'd just wind up. That was it. And I was telling her that, I'm so glad it's easy, because if this was work, then this would not have been fun. And I don't think it would have been fun for anyone to hear either. And she said, but, the thing is, we've put in the work. We've spent, and she was like, when did you start reading? And I can't remember when I started reading, they're among my oldest memories. So she was like, well, then basically you've been working at this your whole damn life. That's what's showing up. That's the work that's showing up when we're talking. The fact that we can jump from Enid Blyton, well, in her case, from Enid Blyton to, I don't know, Foucault, to some Russian author, to the trashy romance that she read last week, that's the range that someone like her commands, and brings in. It seems effortless, but it's not actually. It's actually a lot of labor that's gone into it. It's just not, it doesn't feel like labor in the conventional sense of the word, because we've done it with a sense of joy and a sense of satisfaction. But the work is actually continuous, and the process, therefore, is actually kind of continuous. I think one of the downsides of being a critic, I don't know what it's like to be a reviewer, because I don't think I've done that in that sense. But as a critic, one of the downsides is that you start looking at everything from that critical point of view, by which I don't mean a negative point of view, but from the position of thinking of it analytically. What could it mean? What is going on here? What does it remind you of? What could it have been? All of these questions, you start doing it for everything. So in some ways, it becomes harder to just simply enjoy something like that. The pleasures of that are kind of taken away from you. I will overthink the Mills and Boon with the same rigor that I will have overthought the last literary fiction novel that I've read. That's just how I roll now. There was a time when I did not, but that, one university education in English literature and all these years of writing criticism, this is now how I roll. So yeah, the process seems a lot more simple when you just look at it as points, I think, for me. But if you actually think about the work that has gone into it, that is a very long process.
And for films, then, is it more is it the same? Because when you're watching a film, how different is it when you're then reviewing a book? Because obviously you're taking more time with a book, right? Is my assumption.
So in some senses, I think it's kind of similar, because you will watch, if you haven't watched other works by that filmmaker, then I think you will not be in a good position to properly critique their current work. For example, we were talking about George Miller. I think if you haven't seen Babe, and I mean, like Mad Max, all the Mad Max films are going to be brilliant if you haven't seen what else he's done. But if you've seen what else he's done, then it's even more impressive. But also you start seeing through lines of certain kind of angst that the protagonist has, the kind of role that the antagonist does. And you may not want to admit in public that you are seeing, similarities between a character in Babe in the City and I don't know, Furiosa, but you should make that connection in your head, and that may or may not, that will inform your writing one way or the other. So I think in some ways that that applies. But like most serious film reviewers I know will make the effort of making sure they see a filmmaker's previous works. Like, for example, there is nary a film critic right now who is not watching all of Christopher Nolan's past films, because Oppenheimer is about to descend upon us. So, like, that I think the process in that sense is quite similar. Now the thing is that if you've never watched any of Christopher Nolan's films in the past and you do the crash course now, I don't know whether that, what that brings in terms of perspective, as opposed to someone who's rewatching and bringing that perspective to their writing. So that that kind of work, though, has to go in one way or the other. Whatever it is that you're reviewing, that I think if you want to do it seriously is the work that you have to put in. It's a challenge that I faced and felt very strongly when I was writing about art.
This was the column that I was telling Sangeeta about just before we started recording. Deepanjana used to write an art column for the Sunday Guardian when I was in my year zero as a journalist at Sunday Guardian back in the 2010s. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started in Time Out as an art critic, and I sort of carried through with it as far as I could, as long as people would pay me to write about art. But like when I started, I had only, whatever passing knowledge one has as having casual interest, or as I used to say, Bengali genes mean that you need to wander into a museum if it's there. But that is not the basis of a critical career, quite honestly, though, as it turned out, that was the starting point of my critical career. But the problem that I really faced as an art critic, especially in the early years, was just accessing older works. So you would see an exhibition by an artist. Like, for example, there's an exhibition, let's say, of Raza's later works. What are Raza's older works?
Yeah.
And you have to then turn around because you cannot turn to the internet for this. The impact of a visual work of visual art, the impact that it has on seeing it in person, never translates. Just never translates online. In fact, for me, if a painting looks good as a digital print or as a photograph, in all likelihood, it will not have any of that impact when you see it in person. If the photograph looks god awful, chances are it will hit you like a punch in the gut when you see it in front of you. But so as an art critic, it was really difficult because to educate myself was very, very hard. And if I hadn't had the opportunity at that point of time of being able to see things when I went abroad, I would not have been able to be anywhere close to the limited stuff that I was able to achieve as an art writer. I would have come not even anywhere close to that. So I think at least with books and films, the access is so much easier. So educating yourself is much easier than it is for something like visual art.
Aditya, for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Because even my beginnings as a journalist or as a critic, I started off writing mostly about books. So 90% of my articles would be about books, and I was in charge of the books pages at a weekly newspaper. And again, I was able to do that because in the preceding year, so how I started writing for that particular newspaper was that when I was in college, I would engage with a lot of lit blogs of that era. And I think Deepanjana spoke briefly about that. And it really was a wonderful time, mid to late 2000s in the Indian internet. There were several very high quality literary blogs. And the blogs about art, even Deepanjana's blog, I think you had a blog during that time, and it was very much, you would also engage regularly with, say, people like Jai Arjun Singh or Sridhala Swami or Niranjana Roy. And there were all these bloggers who really presented terrific resources for people who wanted to see how it was done in terms of criticism. But also, I think reading these blogs in that time when I was in my teens, it led me to educate myself a lot. And it was possible, as Deepanjana said, because I was on a college campus, it was easy for me to, download a lot of films and watch them, get access to a lot of used books. For example, about art, I started to teach myself more about Indian art, especially through these really low-cost books that were discards from museums, and they would end up in Daryaganj in huge piles. So I'd buy like 10 of them for like 20 rupees each, and then I would just go through them and sort of try to teach myself things that are. So it's questions of access are more fundamental to, something like art, yes. And but now again with films also, we are sort of heading into a era where it might be difficult to access older stuff because of the way streaming networks have. What they do is they first corner the IP of any particular area that they're looking to cover, let's say family movies or kids movies, etc. And then they sort of artificially restrict the access for everybody else. So the model is exclusive in its very design, in its inception. Okay. So we might be heading towards a time in the next 5 to 10 years where it might be difficult to figure out what George Miller did in the 80s and 90s and how it's different to what he's doing right now.
Interesting. Suchin, for you?
No, I was just going to add to that streaming point about discoverability of movies. Apart from the fact that the older ones, would be less sexy for platforms, it's also the fact that because DVDs aren't a thing, or just owning physical copies are not a thing, you will have great movies that randomly fall through the cracks. That just happen. There will be a time where I'll make this up, luck by chance, or maybe because it's Zoya, but yeah, something like a luck by chance just won't be available anywhere, just because that catalog has not had that deal with that platform, and which is insane. Is that movie, or many like it, will just not, which is just, and I'm not even talking about very old movies where, that will happen, even more sort of contemporary ones, which is quite sad. So your thing was the difference between movies and shorts, right? The approach to that. So, I mean, it's fairly straightforward for me. I mean, obviously a large part of it is very similar, but I mean, the only things that are different in my brain are, how is this story? Why is the story a show, not a movie? What does it sort of justify? I think how, because we've all seen, I mean, especially early on, so many movies that were either on a script level that was stretched out, or literally they used to chop them up, release them as shows. So why is this story a show? Because there's sort of this form do justice to the story and vice versa. Also, how are they using the form, right? In the sense that which I still think very few filmmakers do. Just how are you using each episode? What is your build-up like? How are you sort of balancing small versus big, versus just telling, like so many of them, even on a writing level, are 7-episode movies. It's just a big story that I've just split across. So how are you really using the form to tell sort of the story? Also, it's a bit it's different because like TV in its true traditional sense, as we all grew up with it, with like 6 seasons of 25 episodes. Now, what's sort of sexy in the peak TV era, it's sort of not really television, it's not really movies, it's these 8-episode miniseries. That's what's, and sort of they exist somewhere in between, right? So they're on, like people call it cinematic television, that's sort of what it is. So it's slightly, it wouldn't really be right to class it as traditional television or a movie, it sort of exists somewhere in between. But yeah, basically, how are you using the long format to tell your story? That's basically it. Aside from that, it's still how you'd respond to it.
So before we move into audience questions, last thing is, what makes a story good for you, and what do you find yourselves responding to the most in a story, regardless of the medium? Who'd like to go first?
I'll take this first because I think I have the quickest answer. So it's a tough one, but there are two things that come to mind. I remember once, it's very, very pragmatic, but I remember one answer that really stuck with me, where there was Hriday Ranjan, who's a fellow film companion critic. He once said something which is very specific. He basically said, anything where you're not on your phone. I'm sure he meant it as an audience, but that was, again, it's very, very specific. But the idea that basically, I guess, that you're lost in it. But something I've been thinking about a lot recently is actually something Deepanjana said about the fact that we are now plagued with an analytical mind, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. So one thing I've been thinking about a lot recently is something that makes you forget your brain, something that forget to take notes, something that you're not deconstructing it, whether you're an audience, because that's the annoying part, right? That analytical mind will now translate to the silly, fun popcorn thing you're watching. So something that truly lets you forget yourself and just have fun with it and get lost in it, rather than this character, this narrative. Okay, this is, where's this going? What does this mean? Or even that bit didn't work. This little character thing didn't work. That to me is something that, which, I know is very difficult to do, because the nature of being a critic is you're just watching more and more and more and more. So it's arguably harder to stand out, but just something that truly makes you forget yourself, I think, is something I class as great. Good.
Interesting. Deepanjana, would you like to go next?
I don't know. I mean, I think all I'm asking for is really a good story.
What makes it, like, generally, what have you found yourself responding to?
So here's the thing. I mean, I have rather wide-ranging tastes. I mean, like when it comes to films and streaming shows, the only thing that I will not watch is horror. I'm a complete, whatever pipsqueak when it comes to horror. So that's not my world.
No, same. I don't watch horror either. So
I love reading about horror, though. Like well done analyses of horror films. They are so good, because the thing is that horror has such great potential for constructive cultural criticism, right? Especially in recent times. But even if you're looking at that, the horrible saws and old Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of stuff, the writing is amazing. I never want to see it, though. Just never, ever show it to me. But the point is that aside from horror, I will watch anything. When it comes to books, I don't even have that no-go area. I will pretty much read anything. I mean, I've ended up reading a book on mathematics and I failed maths. So, I mean, nothing is a no-go area when it comes to reading. So, see, the thing is, so I don't have a particular thing that will make me like it. And I'm quite glad about that, because it basically, it's not that there's one thing that I will go in for. Like, I remember some years ago, a friend of mine told me that, my resolution now, from now on, they also studied literature. So by virtue of our education, we have read many dead white men's works. So in that context, there was, as of now, no more dead white men.
Okay.
In fact, no more living white men either. It's only going to be other genders and people of color. And I was like, at a level of principle, I understand, and more power to you. Read whatever the hell you want, man. I'm never going to tell anyone what to read. I will not put that constraint down on myself, though. Because the fact of the matter is that there will be some white boy fiction that I will like tremendously, I'm sure. Just as I will...
White boy fiction.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah.
So I don't have that specific, I don't have any sort of specific touchstones in that sense. I genuinely think, I know this is very vague, but it's also, I mean, if you think about it, it's also the most specific thing I can ask for, a well-told story. It is the only thing that I need. I mean, I will forgive so much if the story in itself is just well told. But yeah, so I mean, I don't have a specific thing like that. But when it comes to movies and series, I will always watch a romance.
Okay.
Like they are my feel-good space. They are also, for me, see, when I said about overthinking stuff, this is the sort of thing that happens. One of the reasons why I really like romances is, if they're well done, they're just so sweet and they have people and it's all lovely. But it's also a really interesting reflection of aspirations, of masculine ideals, of feminine blueprints that you're supposed to adhere to, whether you're young, you're old, what is being, and they invariably reflect attitudes towards a range of things, not the least of which is what is going to feel satisfying, what is supposed to feel satisfying. They also give you codes of behavior. So, whether we like it or not, we learn from commercial films, particularly. In fact, even from non-commercial films, you learn from them. Whenever you get a chance to see something like this, you turn to, even if it's like, for example, a Pedro Almodovar, who is not known for being rooted in realism, let's put it that way, but you approach his works thinking that, oh, he's going to give you an insight into queerness, for example, into the idea of the matriarch, into the idea of vulnerability and strength in a feminine character. So, you approach these things unwittingly to learn from them. They make that impact upon you. So romances are very interesting because no one is going in there to learn, and yet everyone picks up like 50,000, codes out of it. So from both an analytical as well as, just a softie, truly somewhere inside this crone, there is that. That's what I will always pick up. And I will, like, if I have to choose between Tarkovsky and a romance, no matter what the day of the year, I'm going to go with the romance. But if you're asking me to pick a book, I will probably end up picking Sculpting Time over the romance, depending on where I am that day. But, that much. That's about as much as I can say, I think.
Okay. Aditya, for you?
Yeah, I think I'm also along similar lines in the sense that when it comes to books, I might be, like, for example, I might begin a day by reading, Maggie Nelson, who's a really good critic, I feel, and who's someone who's pushing the boundaries of what criticism can achieve in terms of form. But I might end the day by, watching, and I think there's a part of me which has extremely jock movie tastes, like, watching just Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, or like martial arts with people and things should be blown up on screen as frequently and as copiously as possible. And I devote a surprising amount of my movie watching time, I think, watching those kinds of films, because I think it has something to do with how I sort of view the role of books versus the role of films in my life also. So it's not like I don't watch Tarkovsky films, or just the other day I watched a really good film by a filmmaker called Nadine Labeki, and so it's not like I don't watch those films, but I think when it comes to films and films that I watch on my downtime, I think it tends towards fairly I would say lowest common denominator films. And I think actually within that also, because as Deepanjana said, you never stop being a critic. Okay, so even when I'm watching like Hong Kong martial arts films of the 70s and 80s, I would then sort of, at the end of it, I would go back and read essays about what was going on in Hong Kong in that time. And those throwaway jokes that you listen to in these things, that they're actually referring to XYZ, so-and-so rebellion was going on, and, the film was trying to do. So those things happen. But yeah, I think when it comes to just visceral enjoyment, I think my movie tastes are very much, very traditionally and aggressively sort of jock movie tastes, I would say.
But many, many years ago, my father had bought two. My parents, this geekiness, nerdiness it's a DNA problem. So my father had bought, at that point of time, the VHS, because those were the days, of Mephisto. And my mother, I think, had bought Padosan or something like that. And at the end of the after there was some years later, they were having some violent argument about, the house having too much, there too little space for more VHSs. And my mother was like, Mephisto, nobody has watched. It is not all that has happened is that the plastic has been torn off, but nobody has watched Mephisto. Padosan, on the other hand, it's like it's squeaking because we've watched it so many times, because it's a really stupid and hilarious film. And my dad was like, Mephisto is art. And my mom was like, you have not watched it once. You watched it in the theater and you have never watched it again.
Actually, this is very instructive of the way, critics the attitudes they have towards things that they watch on their own time with no commercial obligations. Okay, in the sense, like my partner is a lawyer, and she's what you and I would call a serious person, right? Is a person who has like serious and refined and verified tastes in art. So if when I say, ki, okay, today I want to watch like Singham, or you want to watch like so then the reaction you get is the reaction of an honest person who reacts to art and who sees this whole criticism game for what it is.
I actually I find myself watching dumber things over time, like genuinely, like, because again, you literally, after you've survived your week, you maybe have like 1 hour of watching something for yourself, and I literally have become like that, the very annoying audience that we hate, literally just watching the superhero movie I've seen 1,000 times before, just something that I know exactly what I'm in for, just like a brainless action movie. So yeah, I mean, as an audience, I'm just clinging to comfort watches more than I ever have, because yeah, again, you sort of.
But were you accosted by shouts of Jai Shri Ram during Adi Purush?
Oh my God.
I actually did have that in my screening, and I tried to block out that memory, but thank you for bringing it back.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I had put out a poll on Instagram and even Twitter. So we did get in a few questions. So we'll just start it off. So, okay, first one, Deepak Chandrasekharan asks, or says rather, not trolling, but when stories are subjective, what is the point of reviewing?
So first of all, just because something is subjective, it doesn't mean that it cannot be seen from a critical insight and that you won't gain something from that critical insight. You can, of course, ask what is the point of reviewing at all? And the point is interpretation. The point is twofold, really. One is a service, which is that especially today, and I'm talking about, this is not a timeless principle. This is very much rooted in the here and now. We have an incredible array of content and cultural products that are available to anybody who's interested, whether you're interested in books or movies or whatever it is. There's a huge amount of produce out there. You don't know what is there as a regular person. A person who is very interested in this field has limited knowledge. Even that, like, for example, I am very interested in books, and I do try to stay in the know of what is coming out in India and in English literature abroad. But I'm never going to be able to say that I know every release, every important release that's come out, or even the voices that should come out. So all of our knowledge is limited, but within that, someone who is interested and a critic is interested, their knowledge is somewhat wider. So they perform the function of alerting you towards work that you might be interested in consuming. And they help you make sense of it. They help you find if the work of art is a cliff that you got to climb, the critic gives you the footholds that you can kind of follow. It doesn't mean that you have to follow that exact route. You're welcome to take your own path up that cliff, but it's a foothold.
Aditya, Suchin, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'd also just say that it's very, very few words in that statement, but if you're saying stories are subjective, that directly implies that it lends itself to discussion, and that's all criticism is, right? It's the fact that every single movie is a discussion and trying to have the discussion that thing deserves. And so there are 50,000 discussions to have within that one statement. What is the story? What is the interpretation of that story if it's a pre-existing one? What are you trying to say? And then there is the storytelling, which is the other massive beast of it, right? What are you saying and how are you saying it? So if you're saying it's subjective, then I would say that means it deserves discussion, and that's exactly what film criticism is.
There are films and filmmakers where you can objectively say so-and-so filmmaker doesn't really know how to operate a camera, doesn't really understand much about blocking, understand much about lighting. Okay, so there are things that you can objectively state about skill levels, even in the most subjective stories. Okay, and the sad part is that whether we are talking about books or films, there are large swaths of mass-produced art in which the basic skills are lacking. Like Deepanjana pointed out a while ago, how typos are legion in produced books. Similarly, basic elementary errors of lighting, blocking, shooting, these are very visible in a lot of mass-produced visual art as well in it that comes out of India. So pointing out that those things are objectively bad or done, that doesn't impugn upon the subjective nature of the whole thing. Okay, so that's one. And second is there's this thing, just like Murphy's Law, there's a thing called Sturgeon's Law, which says that 2/3 of everything is crap. Okay, and I think the critic's role is also, I think, to act as that sort of primary filter, where you sort of define that is the 2/3 that is indeed crap. So
Okay.
I just want to add that I think Aditya's answer is a great response to it. I think something that I get asked a lot, and I think every critic does, is like, the whole idea of, but isn't all criticism subjective? It's just somebody's opinion, It's like, well, obviously that is a part of it, but there is an objective part of it, right? There are certain things, like if you discuss on a skill level, you discuss that sort of, that character just disappears, whatever you want to talk about, but there is an objective reading as well, in certain elements. So yeah, and I feel like people don't sort of see that part.
Okay. So, next question. This is by someone with the handle Stepdaddy. Okay.
Sorry, that's my other one. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. Well, good question, I guess, that you've asked. Does criticism take away from the joy of film?
I mean, I think if it's a film that's good, then it will bring you joy. And for better or for worse, really bad films tend to give the reader a lot of joy and the writer a lot of joy in the process of writing those reviews. So joy is a very complicated idea in this sort of thing. But the thing is that I feel like if you don't enjoy the process of analysis, then you should not be a critic. And if you enjoy the process of analysis, then overthinking, that's why you do this. So no, it doesn't take the joy out of it. If anything, it is all around you. There is more joy than you'd anticipated. I think what is worth pointing out, though, is that, and I don't think enough people understand this, and this is particularly true, I think, for film and streaming reviews, but also for anything else, I suppose, books as well. There's a kind of stamina you need to be able to do this. Like, for example, Suchin watches more than like 2 shows a week.
Oh, wow.
There are weeks where he will watch 4 shows. And he will make sense of it. And he will sound coherent in that review and leave you with ideas to think about, whether or not you agree with him.
Can we end it there? Because I feel nice about myself momentarily. No, okay, sorry. Okay.
We had you, Sachin, all the time. No, but I mean, that there is a certain, just a basic intellectual stamina that you need to develop. Watching stuff constantly without glazing over. And the thing is that most people who are watching stuff and are not critics, they do zone out. Like, there are things that you will watch for fun that you will zone out about, right? It goes on as ambient noise, you fall asleep to it or something like that. That's not something you can do as a critic. You've got to be awake and alert for literally all of it, whether or not it feels like a good moment or not. So I think that is the trying part. And that can feel like a challenge, because after a point, like, for example, the Bombay Film Festival, Mami will come back this year. Mami is a time when those of us who love movies and are able to access it in Bombay, we will watch 3 to 4 films a day. Minimum, right? Now, it does not matter how brilliant that last film is, it is a struggle. The truth is, it is a struggle. And we go through it because we love the movies and we want that transformative experience. So we will push ourselves with caffeine and whatnot to, caffeine and cheap Chinese to make ourselves stronger in the process. But it is hard. So the stamina, I think, is something that's worth keeping in mind. But in general, I don't think if you really love this stuff, that's the only reason you become a critic, right? You don't do this for the money. You certainly don't do it for, like, I don't know, respect, because that's not. I'm sorry, that doesn't happen. If you
get a lot of disrespect. You like disrespect.
You want a lot of disrespect. Like, the Bollywood movie version of the critic who everyone fears, ain't nobody like that. Yeah, like, that's not the real world.
The funny thing is, when that stereotype started coming in Bollywood films around the late 2000s, it had already been dead for some 10 years.
Oh,
that's so true.
Okay. Okay, but Aditya, do you think criticism takes away from the joy of
Not at
film?
all. Not at
Yeah.
all. I don't think I ever faced that. If anything, I'll tell you that when I worked in publishing and I was editing 5 or 6 books at the same time,
Yeah.
that did take away the joy out of reading for a while, for me at least.
Mm.
And I think that definitely contributed towards my decision to ultimately leave publishing because I think I probably can live in a world where I don't derive that much enjoyment from films. But if that were to happen with books, I think that would sort of fundamentally alter me in a way that I wouldn't be comfortable with. So I think that I think editing and because that's the reason I mentioned that editors read the text closer than any human being should. Okay, so it's in a ways it's a sort of self-harming enterprise, editing.
Yeah, I agree.
So because of that, a portion of my enjoyment from reading was taken away because of professional editing. But with criticism, I don't think I've felt anything like that.
Okay, Sachin, for you?
I just say two things. Like Deepanjana said, you do this because you love movies, right? But then by stepping into this profession, if you're privileged enough and that's what you want to do, it changes your relationship with movies. So that's it. Not that you will derive any less joy from it, but it might change. Now you're sort of engaging with them on a much deeper level, and sort of your world changes. So it just changes your relationship. But I don't think it's different. But the only thing I'd say is it's not about less joy. It's just, I think, more than the movies themselves. Thinking from an analytical perspective or watching something terrible, I will survive Adi Purush and I can still love movies. It's more sometimes I think for me, it's the other aspects of this world, making this world your career that don't take joy away, but they bring sort of stress into it. Whether you're a freelance or you're, film journalist, not the most lucrative field, not the easiest thing. Your average week is, very few people can do it with their sort of just chilling, and it's not exactly the easiest gig. So that tests your love of the thing sometimes, but does it change your ability to feel love for something? Absolutely not. When it's just about you and the screen and sort of taking something in, that's always going to be magical. But sometimes the other peripheral factors, but that's more of a career thing.
Okay. So Sana Mariam asks, what do you think is the impact that OTT has had on the stories that are being most made now? Sachin, would you like to take that?
Technically, when it started, it took away all the constraints of what a theatrical film needs to be. Because if you think about it, a Hindi theatrical film is actually very, very specific. It's not, there's very little diversity. You're making a film, so your idea, whether it's a small indie film, has to go through so much dilution. It has to be in two halves. Somebody will say it has to have songs. You have to make it commercially viable. You can't swear. There are so many limiting factors to make it a theatrical film. So technically, on a purist level, it takes those things away. It lets you tell the story you want to tell. Whether it's through a show or a movie. That's why you get so many of the voices who didn't find commercial success necessarily on the big screen. You think of Vikramaditya Murpane, Zoya Akhtar, sort of Rajan DK, Hansal Mehta, and sort of you can see them really flourish on streaming because finally they're free to tell the story they want to tell. But then, you don't want to celebrate it too much because there are other factors, right? The star system very much exists on streaming as well. That exists. And there are genres, there are safe bets. Every 80% of everything is a gangster drama based in UP. So, it's sort of, it is very freeing. There is a lot more diversity. I do think the best Hindi language storytelling is all on streaming. Having said that, you can't just say it is the pure thing, which is finally giving every kind of story its due because there are very much limitations.
Aditya, Deepanjana, do you have anything to add to that?
The OTT era is particularly good time for a critic who has some experience, I think, covering both books and films because there are a lot of IPs that are being mined for OTT shows all around the world. And I think it's a distinct advantage if you have a critic who's familiar with both worlds in that way.
Yeah.
If you look at, and in TV and OTT worlds, we look at someone like Eleanor Catton, for example, who's a Booker winner, who's a really well-known novelist around the world. Now she has written a Jane Austen screenplay. Now she has adapted her own novel in a very different way. Like it's not a linear adaptation of the novel at all. like the main character is different in the novel and the series.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are going to see more and more cross-pollination between these worlds in the OTT era.
Yeah. Yeah, book to screen adaptations, I think, are just becoming a bigger thing as the days go by.
Definitely.
Okay. So last question. This is by Aishwarya Zavalgaikar. An instance where you have received a lot of flack or the author or director has threatened you.
I mean, there's so many. So many. I mean, true, and not a director. Or, I can't remember now. I'm an old woman.
I mean, you don't have to take names, obviously, but has there been an instance where?
Of course. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if Suchin and Aditya will agree with me on this, but I'm not somebody who takes that sort of response very seriously. First of all, if you are the person who has made the work, so if you're the filmmaker or the author, and I have written something negatively critical about your work, I completely understand you wanting to skin me alive and stick pins into a voodoo doll of me. It's your work, and you've put effort, time, etc. in it, and here I am trashing it. You're well within your rights to feel upset and lash out as well. Really, knock yourself out. I don't hold that against anybody. I don't think I should take it particularly seriously. Unless I have done something unfair with my review. That's a different matter. But I don't think I have. Till date, I don't think I can. I'm very confident about that. I have not been unfair to a work, and I have not been personal. My reaction and my critical response has not been rooted in a personal space. It's definitely something that I'm approaching as a critic. So, I mean, yes, it happens all the time. Sometimes it's extremely entertaining. I had a great moment when I'd gone to I don't usually do the tree festivals because they're very odd spaces. But this was one that I had gone for. And this author, quite famous, came up to me and said, "Oh, you're Deepanjana, you hated my book."
Oh my God.
That was literally the opening line. And I was like, but I liked the last one. If that makes it any better. And they responded with, "Not that much. You had many things to say." And then I realized that's true. I did have many things to say about that one as well. What do you do? I mean, you just hope that it makes for good conversation to throw into awkward party moments when you just need to fill a silence that is just going on for too long. That's all those responses are good for, as far as I'm concerned. I really feel like, I mean, I think there's a significant difference between being trolled and being threatened and getting these sort of, "How dare you say bad things about my work" kind of, responses. There's a very significant difference between those two, and we tend to miss that these days. It is not scary to go up to a person or meet somebody whose work you haven't liked. If you have written it with a certain degree of integrity, then it should not be a problem. But on the other hand, if someone is attacking you or targeting you at a level of, threat and danger, that has nothing. I mean, I don't think there are very few people who will actively go out to harm a critic because they have said something bad in their. Let me put it that way. We are not. What was that film of R. Balki's? Yeah. Now, how am I forgetting? Thank you. We are not in the world of Chop. Even if this has actually come out as a film, this is not likely to happen anytime soon.
Okay. Aditya?
There have been many occasions.
Oh, okay. Would you like to share one of them?
Send us the screenshot.
There have been many. There have been screenshots. In one occasion, there were entire articles in HuffPost about the beef. So, so there have been let's say, dust-ups with film people, with book people. On one occasion, what happened was, it wasn't even like a review that I wrote, but so it started off as the writer The writer was Suketu Mehta, I think. And I think Supriya Nair, who she touches upon this in one of the podcasts that I think you two do together in the Lit Pickers. She touched upon this incident. What happened was Supriya wrote a bad review of a Suketu Mehta book, and then she got blocked by Suketu. It was a different thing, but she got blocked on Twitter for that also. But basically, Suketu Mehta shared that negative review along with a snide, very uncleish sort of comment about that critics are like eunuchs in a harem. They can watch, they can comment, but they cannot participate. Okay, so this eminently avuncular sort of snide comment about a bad review that Suketu Mehta shared, and I just sort of quietly. I believe so. He did this on Twitter, and what I did was I commented beneath that, saying, and yet, if you had actually read up on harems, you would have realized that harems used to be guarded by eunuchs. So that comment went viral, and that whole sort of beef went viral briefly. So that was my sort of brush with this feud thing. But yeah, in general, I think these days people are, and I was telling this about before we started recording, I think this phenomenon of artists pushing back against critics is a fairly recent one. We also see it as recent because of a very specific vocabulary of Twitter and social media. Because this used to happen all the time. Okay, in the late 2000s, for example, there's an American writer, Richard Ford, who's Pulitzer winner and everything. A Pulitzer winner getting a bad review from a fellow writer. He got one from Colson Whitehead, who's later also won the Pulitzer himself. But he got a bad review from Colson Whitehead. He went up to Colson Whitehead at a party and spat in his face. I would argue that is a more honest reaction than, subtweeting or quote tweeting someone. Okay, but that sort of thing doesn't happen anymore.
I think, oh my God, how am I forgetting his name? The guy who wrote Human Stain.
Philip Roth. Philip Roth.
Thank you.
The one behind you.
Yes. As you can see, I'm very literate. Philip Roth used to, at one point of time, actually write to Amazon reviews that were like,
oh,
how dare you not like Human Stain?
Oh my God.
Apparently, I remember reading this somewhere, and I loved it. I loved the idea because, look, it also shows you how much this person has invested in this work, like emotionally.
Yeah.
Also, writers being petty is like an evergreen genre. It's a gift that keeps on giving. It's brilliant.
Glorious. It's glorious. I mean, I think if you want to be a novelist, being petty is a very big
Definitely a prerequisite. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just clarify, are we advocating for people to spit in our faces? Because that's not part of my daily skincare routine.
I think there are lesser evils. Let's just put it that way.
Okay, I'm changing profession, but for not the reason I thought I would be.
Okay.
I just got a couple of things. Firstly, I think luckily for me, because I do streaming, it's so far less sexy. It's like, for Deepanjana, Rahul, Anu, they do movies, right? So there's a lot more attention and focus on those releases. And those filmmakers will, I think those filmmakers are much more like, I think streaming is still considered smaller and more nascent. So I don't see...
I don't agree with him at all, by the way. I just need to put this on audio record, but continue.
No, I mean, I do think so. I feel like both on an attention level from an audience perspective, a big Bollywood movie is given a lot more attention. And so, and maybe because I haven't done it long enough, I don't see that much sort of hate. Also, I think when you do get a lot of people who don't like filmmakers disliking you, it'll happen behind your back. Like I've met multiple filmmakers who use me as a conduit to pitch about other FC critics. So I think that definitely happens. Also, I can confidently say, because I'm on video, there is nothing any filmmaker could ever say to me that'll come close to the YouTube comments.
Okay.
Like, I mean, I've trained and I've been scarred, so there's nothing. I mean, the creativity is insane. I like the idea of actors responding to reviews online, because there are some very responsible ones who feel they can say whatever. So I like that idea, but most of the time when I see it, I just find it incredibly insecure, because so we've seen actors recently, as Aditya said, and it's just nobody's engaging with the nuance of the review. You're getting annoyed at the two lines, and you have no idea what the reviewer is saying. There are sometimes when it's literally the opposite of what you think it is, and that's very frustrating. You're taking a review out of context and you're losing, which is, happened in the past, which is annoying. So they don't engage with the nuance. And the only other thing I'd say, which really annoys me, is I know for a fact there are multiple filmmakers and actors and stuff who genuinely, sincerely believe that Film Companion has an issue with them, which is incredibly, none of us have the time, effort, or energy. We're just tired and want to get through each day. So it's two things, 2-3 of my films back to back or shows, and you think it's a person, it's not. Or the other one, which is annoying, is you haven't reviewed my last 3 things, my one short film, my one film, as if we have a shit list that people that we are actively avoiding, which again is insanely, insecure, and nobody has that time and energy. But honestly, I really don't know. I struggle with it all the time. I don't know ultimately what the relationship between filmmaker and critic should look like. But in an ideal world, because you could just say that we're supposed to be heartless and they're supposed to be delusional. But honestly, if everyone is just mature, if we believe that a filmmaker, especially the sincere ones, are trying to put something across, and then if they believe that the few critics who care about what they do are trying to have a meaningful discussion, and everyone's a mature adult, that should be enough. Everyone doesn't have to be best friends at the end of the day, but understand.
Well, I think the 3 of you are doing wonderfully in your own jobs. So more power to the 3 of you, and keep doing what you're doing. And maybe we'll see you again on another panel discussion if we have more to talk about, which I think we will. But yeah, thank you guys so much for taking the time and coming out to do this.
So that was our bonus episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to watch the video version of it, you can access that on YouTube. This is a slightly extended version, the audio one. So there's stuff here which you actually won't find on the video one. So I hope you enjoy both. And on that note, let's talk about season 3. So season 3 is officially in production. I'm really excited for you guys to hear those conversations and, kind of hear the guests coming on there. And with regard to when it's releasing, fingers crossed, episodes should start coming out in November. And yeah, like I said, I'm really excited for you guys to listen to those. And like I always say, talk real soon. And please do write in, what your thoughts are about the show, if there's anything you'd like to see on season 3. And on that note, I will talk to you real soon.